Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into something that's at the absolute core of the justice system, confessions. Specifically, what makes a confession actually usable in court. You might be surprised to learn how complicated the rules really are. So, let's get right into it. It really does sound like a riddle, doesn't it? But it's a hugely important legal question. When can someone admit to something, but have that admission thrown out of court? Why does that happen? Well, that's the central problem we are going to unpack today. Okay, so here it is, the big one. Everything, and I mean everything we're about to talk about, boils down to this single word, voluntary. For a confession to even be considered by a court, it has to be voluntary. But as you're about to see, what voluntary means inside an interrogation room is way more complex than you'd think. So to really understand this, here's our game plan. We're going to start with that core rule. Then we'll look at who actually holds the power to influence a confession. After that, we'll talk about the specific words that cross the line. We call those inducements. Then we'll explore how the environment itself can be a form of pressure. And finally, we'll get into the mental state of the person confessing. All right, let's kick things off with a rule itself. The whole reason we have this voluntary confession rule is to make sure a statement is actually reliable and not just something somebody said under duress. What's at stake here is pretty fundamental. We need to be sure a confession is true, not just words someone said to make a really unpleasant situation stop. So the very first piece of this puzzle is figuring out who this person in authority is. Who exactly are we talking about? Well, the answer is probably a lot broader than you're imagining. And this definition really gets to the heart of it. You see, the key isn't really their job title. It's all about the perception of the person being questioned. Do they believe this individual has some sway over what happens to them? That's what matters. Okay, so some of these are obvious, right? A police constable, a prosecutor, of course. But look how the list expands. An employer can count if the crime was, say, theft from the company. And get this, even the mother of a victim in certain cases, because the accused might reasonably believe she has the power to influence things. And now for the flip side. These folks are generally not considered people in authority. A doctor, a prison chaplain, even an undercover cop, as long as the accused doesn't know they're a cop. Why? Because the accused wouldn't think they have any power to affect the legal outcome. But check this out. Here's a really fascinating twist. Let's say a friend of the accused offers them a deal, right there in the interrogation room, and the police officer just stands there, says nothing. The law actually sees that silence as a kind of silent approval. It's treated as if the offer came right from the cop, unless they pipe up and say, nope, that's not how it works. Okay, so we know who can mess up a confession. The next big question is how? What actual words or actions cross that line from questioning to coercion? In legal speak, we call these things inducements. Now, this is where the line gets incredibly fine. Look at the left side. Just saying, tell the truth, or appealing to someone's morals, that's generally okay. But look at the right. As soon as you start suggesting a real-world benefit or harm, you're in trouble. Phrases like, it would be better for you, or it will be worse for you. Those are huge red flags that an illegal inducement is on the table. I mean, you really can't get much more direct than this example from an old case. The victim of a theft basically says, look, just give me my money back, and I couldn't care less what happens to you. That is a classic inducement, a direct promise to make the problem go away, which makes any confession that follows involuntary. And remember, an inducement isn't always as simple, if you do this, you get that. It can be a threat of violence, sure, but it can also be a subtle hint of a pardon or something deeply emotional. Imagine being told the only way you'll get to see your dying wife is if you confess. That's not a free choice, is it? So far, we've mostly talked about specific words, threats, and promises. But sometimes you don't need any of that. Sometimes the entire situation, the whole atmosphere of the interrogation itself, can be so oppressive that it makes a confession invalid. This definition from Lord McDermott is just so vivid. His will crumbles. It's not about physical force. It's a psychological state. It's about breaking someone down with pressure until they talk when they otherwise would have kept quiet. So how in the world does a court measure something like a crumbled will? Well, they look at a checklist of tangible things. How long were they questioned? Did they get breaks, food, water? How long had they been in custody? And crucially, they look at the person themselves. their age, their health, their past experience. An interrogation that a hardened criminal could handle might be completely oppressive to a teenager or someone who is unwell. And that brings us to our final and maybe the most complicated layer of all this. What happens when the pressure isn't really coming from the outside, but from inside the person's own head? This is a concept called basal involuntariness. This idea comes into play when a person's mental state is just so fragile, maybe from an injury, a mental health condition, or extreme distress, that anything they say is considered totally unreliable. The concern here isn't just about whether their choice was free, but whether their words can be trusted at all. So how does the law deal with this? Well, it's a very careful balancing act. As you can see here, just because someone has an unsound mind doesn't mean their confession is automatically out. But it does trigger a whole series of safeguards. A court has to ask, is a verdict based on this confession safe? Did this person even have the capacity to make a free choice to speak? And it gives the judge the power to throw the evidence out entirely if it seems unfair. If it is allowed in, the judge has to give the jury a very strong warning about the dangers of relying on it. And one last absolutely critical point to all of this. It's not up to the accused to prove they were coerced. It is 100% on the prosecution to prove to the court that the confession was, in fact, voluntary. That's a fundamental protection built right into the system. So, as we've seen, that line between a voluntary and an involuntary confession, it's blurry, it's complex, and it's deeply, deeply human. And it all leaves us with this massive question. In this constant quest for justice, how do you strike the right balance between the need to solve crimes and the duty to protect the minds of the accused from pressure, from coercion, and from their own vulnerabilities?